Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the BioFi community of practice. If this is your first time with us, we're so glad you're here. If this is your 10th time with us, we're also so glad you're here. These calls are always such a delight to really sink ourselves in to the on-the-ground practical work that's going on. And we have an amazing team from the Northeast here to present and tell us about their work. Um, and before we get to them, I always like to do just some little context setting and a couple announcements, and then move us into breakout rooms so we can get to know each other and wake ourselves up and get ready to be engaged in an interactive session. This is not just a one-way transfer of information. There will be a presentation, but then we open it up to dialogue and questions from the audience. The whole point of this is to build interactivity and connection and mutual learning across practitioners. Um, so, just to ground us in purpose, I always like to remind us why we're here, which is, let's get in that chat. Yeah, we're here to cultivate and support a community of practitioners who are designing, capitalizing, implementing, and evolving bioregional financing facilities through peer-to-peer learning and coordination. This is an event hosted by the BioFi community of practice. We've got over 350 folks from around the world engaging in this shared inquiry. And this is one of the events we do to further those inquiries and learn from people working in place. Um, I don't want to go too deep into announcements because I think the Force of the Northeast team will get to that, especially regarding the Gitcoin round, which will close in 2 days. So I imagine they'll share a bit about that, and I'll close this out with some announcement on that too. But it's been a really exciting time in the world of BioFi, putting together this cohort of 14 bioregional organizing teams from around the world, all endeavoring towards creating bioregional financing facilities or other related approaches to funding place-based regeneration. So we'll get to that in a bit. But first, just want to open this up to some breakout rooms to meet and greet. Amazing. Well, now is the time where we get to hear from our friends in the Northeast. And I don't know if it's Will or Roberta kicking it off. I think we're going to hear from several different folks on the team, and I don't actually know the order. So I think you should have sharing permissions, but let me know if you need anything from me.
Okay, yeah. So I think we've worked out an order here, and I think I'm going to share. Um, Request to share has been sent. Uh, okay. Um, well, can you all see that there?
We sure can.
Okay. Z, do you want to kick us off here, and you can tell me to advance the slides?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give us a little bookending here. So, hello everyone. I'm Z Grabowski, Polish Arrivant, and I'm here to share a little bit about our bioregion and our collective work. And it's already been beautiful to meet folks doing things that I wasn't aware of. And so there's a rich diversity of actors here, and we'll try to give an overview and an invitation to connect on this kind of collective process as well as a number of individual projects that are going around. So. Um, on the next slide, you can see kind of in the spirit of that, currently we're essentially a network that's, in my mind, serving as sort of a crystallizing force, a catalyst to bring together folks who are seeking bioregional regeneration from many different avenues, but under this kind of guiding umbrella and idea that we really need to foster intertribal connections and alliances to guide the right our path back towards right relations. Really, this kind of connective force is seeking to enable regenerative resource flows across and among communities here. Right now, the folks who are involved in this collective effort include representatives from both the Mashantucket, Pequot, and Eastern Pequot tribal nations, and folks up in Maine through the Wabanaki Alliance have also been engaged. The organization I mostly work for now, the Alliance for the Mystic River Watershed, has been brought into this through our kind of intertribal and non-tribal collaborative watershed regeneration work. And we also, I don't want to read all these off. I couldn't do justice to a nutshell for everyone with the time we have, and we want to leave plenty of space for discussion. But this gives you a flavor of, the a diversity of types of actors working at different scales. We have a good representation from people who have been doing the kind of metaphysical and connecting and process-based work. So Ben's on the call here too. Folks who've been really engaged in bioregioning as a process for quite some time. And we're trying to essentially grow the connections between the procedural, the financial elements and community with a lot of the centers who have been engaged in bioregional education, as well as those who are doing the actual practical work on the ground, sometimes through these centers, but really getting their hands. And so a guiding motto in my mind has been the soil to structure, and in that sense, we are a seed of sorts, a collective embryonic organization seeking to provide a catalytic transformation of our bioregion. On the next slides, for those folks who aren't aware of where we are situated, on planet Earth, we are kind of the northeastern end of Turtle Island of sorts before you get into the subarctic zone, outlined in red here on this map from One Future. And if you kind of zoom into this area, which often gets circumscribed by the colonial boundaries of New England, which we can discuss, we are a region that's been typified in much deeper time by this kind of shared linguistic and cultural traditions of Algonquin-speaking peoples. Of course, Algonquin-speaking peoples are much more dispersed and distributed than just our region, but they have a cultural cohesion across what our friend Mike Thomas at Mashantucket Pequot calls from Passamaquoddy down to Paugussett, so stretching the entire coastline of the northeastern United States, which we'll return to in a little bit. And as this leads to not just shared kind of cultural characteristics, but also a lot of shared ecological characteristics. And these continue to define culture in our region in a lot of ways. Anyone who's been here, has appreciation for this post-glacial landscape, which, maybe when you're flying in seems quite flat, but when you're on the ground, you are confronted immediately by a very rocky and rugged and hilly terrain in many respects, with wide glacial valleys in other places. It's been really profoundly shaped by beavers, our furry friends here. If you aren't familiar with the old beaver, there's your Exhibit A. They've really been fundamental geological agents as well as ecological agents. So they're a key ecosystem engineer in our region. And a lot of our wide, flat floodplains, which are now currently used for agriculture, have been actually built up and flattened by beaver dams over thousands of years. For folks who don't know this, the Prudential Center in Boston started to lean about 15, 20 years ago. And when they dug down to put in concrete footings into the bedrock to stabilize that big structure, they kept unearthing very, very large diameter trees that had been felled by Castor canadensis' predecessor, Castor, the real beaver, who could weigh up to 400 to 500 pounds, basically a black bear-sized beaver. Which has been well represented by the mythologies and oral histories of all Algonquin-speaking people in our region. So the Boston Fens literally were built by beavers before they were built on top of by humans. I could spend a lot of time talking about beavers, so don't let me distract you all with this. But we're a very heterogeneous region in terms of topography, soil conditions, slope, being ancient soils, ancient bedrocks, stemming back to the formation of the North American continent. Many of our soils are quite poor and required a lot of cultural intervention, as well as the movement of nutrients from ocean systems onto the land, which was done by large migratory fish populations, which have been very well documented in oral history, as well as the colonial kind of recordings of early contact between European peoples. And we're a major draw to folks from the Basque, who were fishing the Grand Banks off of Newfoundland, going back many centuries prior to Columbus's arrival in the Caribbean, and certainly before French and Dutch and English exploration of the Northeast. It's culturally, we are facing the fact that, not only are we ecologically rich, we're also very financially rich in many ways, but we are extremely unevenly rich, I would say. We have some of the highest wealth inequality in the country. I think that's been surpassed by towns outside of Washington, D.C. since the growth of the kind of military industrial consulting complex, for folks who followed that development post September 11th. But for a long time, Connecticut in particular, being on the kind of outside of New York City, was one of the kind of most economically unequal places in the country and in the world. And we're also the longest impacted from American settler colonialism, essentially the place of first harm in many ways, not discounting the fact that Florida and the Caribbean are also sites that are similar, but we are the place where the industry really took that was most entrenched. And Sam Slater, who many credit with the kind of seeding of the Industrial Revolution in North America, essentially, lifted large-scale mill designs from Britain and brought them to Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and they've spread outward since there. So we are typified by a legacy of industrial use. Many rich towns are still engaged in manufacturing, and we have a large number of specialty manufacturers, many of whom are tied into defense contracting down a long supply chain. And we are extremely dense in terms of population. So we are a rich ecological and social zone, but not without our challenges. On the next slide, we kind of lay those out in ways that how we've been thinking about them, and we're certainly open to reframing, in any way that's useful. But the kind of evidence on the ground has pointed at a simultaneous large-scale ecological degradation, especially with regards to water quality, which has in many ways been balanced by large-scale forest regeneration. If you look at our cultural history, we were 96% cleared of forests, very little old growth forest left in our region, less than 3%. And now we are about 70% forest cover. So our region has ecologically accordioned in many ways. And now we're in this interesting mosaic of, low density, high density development, strong car dependence, but also like in many ways, a flourishing forest ecosystem, which is also unhealthy and now fire prone and suffers from a lack of kind of hands-on management in many places, but itself is regenerating quite vigorously. Those migratory fisheries I talked about as being critical for resource flows and nutrient energy flows and supporting our soil health have been cut off by extensive dams, dikes, culverts, and a host of built infrastructures across the landscape that have fragmented the ecology, which is also true for our terrestrial ecosystems, as now many species are, kind of left into their isolated pockets due to our extensive highway, roadway systems. We also have a lack of self-sufficiency in food production, and we're also really kind of trying to address many of these things. There's a lot of dedicated people who are working on different aspects of this puzzle. The ones that I think are most inspiring in many ways to us, and again, this is our current approach. So none of this is final and not meant to exclude anybody, but we have a large, the fact that we're the seat of American settler colonialism has not eradicated indigenous peoples. In fact, they're some of the most resilient on the face of the earth because of this, because they have persisted through ongoing attempts at erasure. And they're in many ways resurging now, and we are in kind of alignment with that resurgence. There's also a very strong regional organic food and co-op movement. Again, been rooted here for quite some time, but is growing today. There's increasing demand for outdoor place-based and experiential education and experiences. There's folks who are now kind of trying to reclaim ancient agroecological, agroforestry practices. With our forest regeneration comes a large amount of interest in how to steer forests and how to relate to forests in the right way to meet our material needs, but also contribute to forest health. There's been a large, robust conservation community, land trust community. There's not much federal land in New England. It's the lowest federal percentage of land in any region in the United States. So much of the conservation has fallen on local regional actors, nonprofits. And there's also, because of that income inequality, a very keen sense of the need to address community justice, social justice, economic justice, and environmental justice. And there is a coalescence of folks who are trying to rebuild fiber sheds, wood baskets, the food shed, and understand this kind of systemic interdependence between those. And like I said, that's kind of the tip of the iceberg, if you will. On this next slide is our faces of the folks who have been kind of brought together by the BioFi initiative in many ways. I think this kind of community of practice and this initiative is really responsible for accelerating us, putting us into more contact with each other, and really when there's a number of us that submitted expressions of interest into this bioregional finance facility, initiative, and I think there were 6 different expressions of some sort or another. And we weren't even really fully aware of who the other groups were working on this. And I think at this point, we're, like I repeatedly hint at, we're seeking to grow the network of folks who are engaged in this initiative. But we've really, I think at this point, started to bring about this kind of larger coalescence and cohesion, and really identified a need that's been longstanding in our region to work across the physical and cultural and social boundaries that we are confronted with, and recognize our shared challenges and shared opportunities. So this is a picture from September of this year, and that's when really brought together us as a cohesive group. But yeah, you can go to the next one. Thanks, Will. And I think we've realized that we have to agree upon some principles, and we're really seeking, in collaboration with our native partners and allies, that we need to figure out. We've already done this with the Alliance for the Mystic River Watershed, and Roberta, who's you're going to hear from in a minute, has also been doing this in Maine, and there's other efforts underway. But I think our near-term goal, is to continue to co-evolve this bioregioning effort with our region's native communities, who have faced fairly unique forms of unique challenges that we'll dig into in a little bit in this presentation. But we have been at work. We have been engaged in a number of convenings in person, online. We're now having regular meetings that I think we're going to be looking for some expanded participation in the near future. We've been rebuilding and reframing kind of how we address challenges using these storing in place frameworks, and we're well on our way to develop a shared principles and a draft strategic vision and plan to feed into this bioregional financing facility process. The principles that we've kind of managed to agree upon as a fairly diverse group, but growing, is that we really, as many folks who are present here, are motivated to restore right Earth relations. So that's to strengthening those relations between communities, or land, and our water as living agentic beings, as well as the built environment, and seeing the built environment as an outgrowth of those right relationships between living systems and humans and place. And through those relationships is how we will engage in Earth regeneration. So regenerative practices are really there to heal relations that are broken, but also sustain and allow for ecosystemic flourishing, as well as human communities that are codependent or interdependent with those ecosystems. In line with that relational kind of worldview, we are, looking at deep kind of allyship, some cases accomplishship, to build respectful and reciprocal relations with tribal and non-tribal communities across the region. And this really requires a realignment of resources to flow into these genuinely regenerative projects. From that, I'll hand it over to Roberta to kind of give us a deeper look at our members and our work.
Thank you, Z. Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yep.
Well, thank you, Z. That was great. And so yeah, I'm going to just kind of go now and look at some of the individual players that are involved in this beautiful network, growing network. I may say one thing that's really important to keep in mind when Z was showing that slide earlier of all of the member organizations and communities that are currently involved in the network. Each one of those represents a network of its own of, partners, and each has its own community of players and partners and collaborators and folks. So this is really a network of networks, and that's one of the things that's so beautiful about it. So onward. Go forward, please, Will. So one thing I'd just like to say from the onset, especially from my personal point of view, the way that I came into this network was through the design school for Regenerating Earth, Joe Brewer's online community for really doing this work on a global scale, and the supports and the community that's needed to actually carry this work forward. And out of that school, we formed a hub focused on the forests of the Northeast. And 4 of us came together to coordinate that group. And the 4 of us include Kitu Winter and Ches Liley, They're both part of Wellspring Commons, in fact, founders, mother-daughter team, founders of Wellspring. I think we're going to talk more about them in a moment. Marianne Connor from the Serious Community and Eco Village, and then me from CB. And we basically came together around this online learning journey. It was a 6-month journey that we took together with other members of the design school, really focused on bioregional learning centers and developing funding ecosystems. So from there, we joined forces with the connections beyond the design school and became part of this bigger network, working as actually it was the bioregional financing facility work spurred by BioFi project and others that really got us to start kind of fleshing out that part of the story and bringing other actors in. And then from those two large groups, we came together as a connected network, which is just beginning to grow in many ways. Next slide, please. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is the bioregional learning center, since that has been really important to our actually coming together. We already in our bioregion have enormous potential for developing a network of bioregional learning centers, each one unique in that it is anchored to place and people in at the more of the community or extended community or sub-region scale. And so to have a network of these learning centers that are unique to place, but also connected through our shared vision, through our collective sense making, through our data that can be pooled for the benefit of all. This idea of this network is really beautiful and already has such great potential. One potential learning center site is the Serious Eco Village, which has been practicing this work in many ways for decades. And Marianne Connor, who I mentioned earlier, she's a principal there, and she's really helping that vision to start coming into development there at Serious Community. I will say that she would be the best person to speak to that, and so I won't attempt to really speak to the detail of that project. I'm going to walk you through the project that I know most about, and that's the one that's taking place in our part of the bioregion. One last thing on that. So are those slides all gone, Will? Okay, okay. They're kind of, all right, that's fine. I'm just, I'm a little out of place here. This one is just a little out of order, I think. But anyway, another one of the players in this that is playing an enormously big role, and Marianne is involved in that group as well as others in our collaborative, is the Connecticut River Bioregioning Collaborative. And the work that they're doing is the weaving and the mapping and the innovating, and just this idea of co-creating a deeper culture of place and coherence with patterns of placemaking. We have people, including Marianne, who has really been leading us in this process of making a new story that's really tied to what the land wants. And so I think that she's providing a lot of guidance in that area, and that this is kind of coming through in all of the organizations, the storying of place. Next slide, please. So CB is the organization that I'm embedded in. We're based in the Western foothills of Maine in the town of Norway. And we have been really trying to crack this nut of how do we transform our community to one that is in harmony with the actual ecological systems that we're embedded in. And what will our food system look like, our energy system, our housing system, our transportation system, and then working to make that vision real at the community scale. And we've had tremendous success in that regard, and holding annual convenings as well. And one of the most beautiful parts of that work is a vision that has been in place for about a decade. That's next slide, please. And that is for what has in the past been called Roberts Farm Community Center for Conservation and Experiential Learning, but we are reframing it based on this work that we're all now so invested in. The Learning Center will take place, will come to be on about 160-acre Roberts Farm property. John Roberts actually was kind of a heroic figure in our community in the 1800s, early 1900s. And he was really a proponent of the grange system. And if any of you are familiar with our granges in what it's typically called New England, you know that they were actually kind of an early model for learning how to live in place in an agricultural and regenerative way. And so, this property will include the residence, which was also bought later on. Next slide, please. And so the plans are to restore that building, to redo the L entirely using locally sourced bio-based materials. There'll be home for a visitor center, research center, office space. We'll have crop trialing there, experimental polyculture projects, regenerative grazing. So really a lot that we can just practice with and workshop out and share with our neighbors how to live in place ecologically. And we have architectural plans for the actual center in hand already, and the fundraising for that project has been ongoing, as I said, for about 10 years. In the meantime, we have a beautiful on grounds school garden program, and our local school district participates in that and has invested financially in the development of that. And the facility now includes a warming hut and a yurt and some greenhouses and a brand new classroom that we're really proud of. Next slide, please. And the most exciting thing that is emerging just recently is that the land trust that manages a Roberts Farm is merging with two other major land trusts in our region. And so they'll have a holding of 43,000 acres between them. But as you can see from the map on the left, the little colored polygons are the land holdings. The area in green is the service area for these three land trusts. So land trusts coming together around a shared vision of a much more coherent, cohesive land base from which we can do our planning, with at its center this bioregional learning center where the focused energy will be on teaching and learning. Next slide, please. And another more recent development is that we're in relationship and negotiations with a group called First Light. It's an Indigenous and non-Indigenous led organization helping to return land to those who have lived here historically and who have been, as Z mentioned, all but erased from the landscape and who are in this moment of resurgence. So that's a beautiful part of this vision as well. So I wanted to just share that with you because I think it's potentially an enormous part of this story are the bioregional learning centers. And I think each of you could consider in your unique parts of the bioregion what that learning center might look like. And these visions could start becoming manifested for all of us. So I just wanted to plant that seed. And I think, next slide, please. I'm trying to move the slides myself. Other things that we've got going on with regard to the various players is Co-Fund Eco is part of our network, and they already have a really robust network so we can connect digitally, both through a digital network, but also there are different ways that we can map out our growing connections. Next slide, please. And this is just a current example of the network mapping that can be done. The geospatial mapping can also be done on this site, sharing of a lot of metadata between the various actors. So it has the potential, once we all get on board with it and get up to speed on how to use it best, it could become a really powerful tool for the interconnectivity, which is going to be key to the success of this whole vision. Next slide, please. Wellspring Commons, that's been another node of really important leadership within our network. I already mentioned Ches and Kitu, who are both the principals of Wellspring Commons, and they started right off the bat as a bioregional hub with the purpose of weaving holistic understanding, what it means to live in place. We're running out of time. This is a really important part of the story. I hope that we'll put some links in the chat after we finish so that you can check out all of these individuals and really explore their work more clearly once we've finished here. Next slide, please. And that brings us to the next speaker, which we have like 3 minutes. I don't think do we have 3 minutes? This is Will. I'm going to hand it off to you. See how many minutes you can do this in. Thank you.
Any comments on timing, Tyler?
Take the time you need, Will. Flow like a river. Move swift if it feels easeful.
Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Will. I'm calling in from Western Massachusetts, from the Connecticut River watershed. And here we're going to take an interlude into something that I am applying to the Northeast bioregion, but could be applicable for any of you in any bioregion. And it's this concept I'm putting forward of hyperbeing. So this is a LiDAR image from Daniel Coe here, which is showing the history of the river just by looking at the sediments and showing the previous course. And I guess one of the things I have been thinking a lot about is the ways that rivers are much more vast beings than we might initially think that they are, both in time and in space. So this term comes from an evolution of Timothy Morton's term hyperobject, which there was a book published in 2014 on climate change that maybe some of you have read. That with hyper being, I'm looking to come from an animist frame in how we consider bioregional scale entities such as watersheds. So being feels more appropriate than object. So I've been looking for cultural waypoints to help get this message across, and Spirited Away, Miyazaki's 2001 film, is one of those. It's a film about rivers and river spirits. Chihiro, our protagonist, this little girl is accompanied on her journeys by a few different river spirits. This one being Haku. There's a period in the film where there's a stink spirit that comes to the bathhouse that she's tending, and it's literally depicting this river cleaning process in that it is a river spirit, and it's just a really great visualization of what it can be like when we have dam removal. On the other side, this king of the river gods, Kawa no Kami, is revealed. So this idea here, why am I even talking about hyper beings? I guess I would say that before we can get into the bioregional financing, we need an ontological shift, and ontos referring to our being state. And uh, there's a number of folks who have used this term ontoshift, but I first heard it in David Bollier and Silke Helfrich's 2019 book Free, Fair, and Alive about commoning and commons. And they said that they set out to write their book and realized that they couldn't do it until they addressed this kind of ontological shift. And I feel like in our bioregional work, the first question is how do we relate to our bioregions as living entities that are much more vast in space and in time than us as individual people. So that's kind of why I'm putting this forward here. And um, the last slide I'll share in this right now is just that on the left, if we have Gaia as this integral Earth organism, that's a framework that's been out there for a while now. When you think of an integral organism, you realize, okay, a disruption anywhere is going to change the state of the whole entity. And then we have local community scale on the bottom right here. And then this hyperbeings is a framework of coming from an integral perspective for the bioregional scale, so this meso scale. All right. I'll just end here with the Yellowstone River, another Daniel Coe LiDAR map. It's the longest undammed river in the continental United States. And the question I'll leave you with is what changes do we need to make in our built environment, law, and culture to center the aliveness of watersheds? And then I'll pass it back over to you again, Z.
Yeah, thanks for that. So with this idea of rivers and watersheds as living beings, I want to just give a typical kind of opportunity from our region. And this is actually, I'm staring at this out the windows in front of me, downtown Collinsville, Connecticut, on the Tungus River here, where we have, this is an axe factory. It was made many different edge tools, and it actually supposedly made over 90% of the edge tools used in the clearance of forests in North and Central America. So if you want to talk about tree karma, this is kind of the epicenter of the karmic relation with trees. They also made bayonets, pieces for muskets, machetes, and they were making them from the kind of mid 1800s, started in the early 1800s. So think of every major conflict that's been between humans in the United States and between the so-called United States and forests and other types of vegetation. And this place has been implicated. And this was nearly destroyed in a flood in 1955. About half of the buildings that are on site were taken out. And over time, this site is being reclaimed by forest, and yet it also serves a vital function for the local community, as this waterfall here was a site of human habitation stretching back since time immemorial. And on the next slide here, you can kind of see a proposal for current regeneration of it. It's a little small as a PDF, but the gist is that this place has been attempted to be redeveloped, as have many former mill towns across the Northeast. And often that redevelopment focuses not on restoring its manufacturing capacity. This company's operations moved to Mexico kind of during the time that it was flooded, and then subsequently got embedded there. The company decided to sell off this facility, and has since, if you're all familiar with the kind of the regulatory process around brownfields and contaminated sites, many multinational companies that were initially based in the United States have used that law to their advantage to become, essentially evade responsibility, because liability often moves with the owner of the property. So once they're able to relinquish ownership, they're no longer financially liable for cleanup. And so it falls on the current owners, who essentially run this place as essentially a service hub for small local businesses. We have a large antique shop. There's many electricians, a diverse number of enterprises. I think there's 50 existing tenants who all have small to medium enterprises based out of this factory. But in order to deal with the cost of cleaning up this site, the way that this is being generally pitched is trying to attract large-scale real estate investment. And that, in the context of the Northeast, is often relying on a high cost of housing and a perceived housing shortage to sell residential units within these formerly industrial sites. And to have residential occupation, you need to clean these things up to quite a high standard. And so many mill owners are faced with this kind of double bind where they don't have the on-hand capital to engage in the type of cleanup that would be required to make the site residential. So they have to actually overinflate the residential housing target to attract enough investment to clean up the site to then overbuild residential units. And often they've done so, finding different ways of having shortcuts and delivering those units at as low cost as possible. If you're following me, that essentially means we're trying to put people to live in, former mill sites that were industrial and overinflate the housing targets to sell like substandard housing in those places. That project has failed 3 times now. At this point, we're in touch with the owner and they're on board with this regenerative design idea. And we were able to convince them of the validity of the concepts to go beyond this kind of just cleanup and mitigation paradigm and embrace a different model of development, which is rooted in community visions for the site, which requires consideration of it as much more as open space and working with the on-site ecology to deal with the existing soil and water contamination issues. So we're looking at the potential for phytoremediation and working alongside the existing ecology and restoring the native biodiversity of the site. And then looking at the potential of using hemp as a phytoremediation crop to then also use hempcrete as a semi-structural insulation material within these historic buildings, which gets around a lot of the requirements from the State Historic Preservation Office for keeping them historically accurate, which is a large conversation we could get into, but then also using its capacity for on-site energy generation and storage. Currently, the site is operations are financially negative just due to the high cost of heating this old complex with ancient technology. And it's a major contributor to climate change. But if we flip this kind of design paradigm on its head and see development as a way to restore right relations, we can also use carbon drawdown construction techniques to create this whole facility as a kind of solution to climate change rather than as a continuing contribution to it. So that's one example of trying to weave together, metaphysical and practical considerations in the work we're doing in this region. Another one, this is the organization I'm rooted in, the Alliance for the Mystic River Watershed, where we're seeking to restore right relations between humans and the ecosystem of the Mystic River in so-called southeastern Connecticut, working with our eastern and Mashantucket Pequot allies, as well as the towns of Stonington, Groton, Ledyard, and North Stonington. So this is really trying to have a model of practical collaboration between tribal nations and municipal entities to engage in collaborative planning in support of ecological health, climate resilience, and equity and justice. We have a strategic plan that's coming together, and we're currently assembling different funding sources to build the community cohesion, visioning capacity to then guide the implementation of practical projects. That's also going for an example of one of those. On the next slide is working specifically with the Eastern Pequot Tribal Nation to deliver a community center, a 5,000 square foot facility that is also serving as a resilience hub and as a demonstration of regenerative building techniques. And ideally, we're pairing that with a farmers education and farmers land access program through our ally Freedom Gerardo, who runs the Venture Farming Institute, which is also assembling resources in support of the expansion of hemp for grain and fiber and construction material production. So really, we're seeking to build a workforce from soil to structure, but then also provide the processing capacity for biomaterials to basically, not just grow the crops and have the building expertise, but have all the steps in place to go from regenerative agriculture to regenerative building. Another example of that in our state is, sorry, and these are we had some last minute readjustments. So actually, if you don't mind, could you go to the next slide, Will, and then we'll hop back to this. So working with our other Pequot allies, the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center, we're also seeking a broader regional intertribal alliance and supporting a broader regional intertribal alliance to protect and restore ancestral waterways. So this goes back to this working, across Algonquin-speaking peoples in the region. And Mike Thomas, who's not here today, but is kind of this is one of his founding visions, is to go beyond the kind of colonial boundaries of the region that you saw earlier and really focus on how our waterways are still connecting us, where maritime and riverine people and right relations with those waters is absolutely essential. But in addition to all these federally recognized tribes we have in the region, so if you want to go back to the other one, we have many folks who've been forcibly de-recognized and denied, or sorry, can you go back? Yeah. Many folks have been de-recognized as being native in our region. So we have a large number of what you could call sort of hidden in broad daylight native communities. One example of this is in the place of Saukyog. And we're gonna, wrap this up as quickly as possible. In the place of principal seat of Connecticut, where the treaties that attempted to extinguish the Pequot Nation were signed, we have a native and urban indigenous community that's seeking greater visibility and recognition, and like trying to establish a native urban center, like is common in most other capital cities throughout the United States. But then if you jump ahead too, we're also very aware that restoring right relations with tribes and with waterways requires right relations with land, which is the kind of goal of the Northeast Food and Fiber Collective. Well, if you want, so this is another kind of example of weaving together across different domains. I know we're getting up on low on time, so if you want to skip ahead to the Bio-Based Materials Collective, this is in addition to this food and fiber shed work. There's a effort that started out regionally. It was the Northeast Bio-Based Materials Collective, but it was really trying to work across different sectors to scale regenerative building from soil to structure, working on the supply chain, policy cohesion, education, as well as the financial model, which on the next slide, you can see how we've started to envision how that might work in relation to the BioFi initiative, where the BBMC is functioning as a kind of international coalition of folks working to kind of scale regenerative building, and through its connection to regenerative agriculture. And that is fundamentally tied into the idea of having financing facilities that can fill the gaps in the missing pieces of different supply chains and build the market share for regenerative building so it becomes mainstream. And the learning centers are a key part of building public awareness around the possibility and the benefits of those approaches. The infrastructure for some of that exists already, through you all, and also in our specific zone through the Bloom platform that Magenta is running. Yeah, you're good. And so we have a Bloom node in there, or we can call it a Bloom, where we are starting to already work with Web 3.0 tools to support folks working on different aspects of this puzzle. And I was going to give you a little bit more on the kind of conceptual onto shifts in the next slide. But we can share the link to this paper where with a colleague, we've developed these frameworks for incorporating indigenous justice frameworks for relational ethics in land-based design practices. There's a wealth of other indigenous scholars that are represented in that paper, and we've tried to provide a synthetic framework that gives kind of a rationale for engaging in acts of generative refusal to make the space for centering, healing, and restoring right relations, but ultimately that needs to result in strengthened indigenous governance. Otherwise, just hopefully you all know what happens if we don't do that. And then the next slide, we have a rationale for like why we think that this addressing fundamental land access issues is the foundation of this kind of regenerative economic system. And if we can do that, then we can build up these other kind of ventures and sectors that we're all interested in. But really having the green manufacturing regionally and regenerating our urban areas, which are sites of profound need, is fundamentally interdependent with addressing our rural challenges. And through that kind of cycle of rebuilding the basis for our economy, we can contribute to a proliferation of other value-added goods and service sectors. But really, it's the productive land relations that I see as the base for this. From that point of view, we have an initial kind of strategic concept for embodied interdependent systemic transformation. This is something that's very much in development, and we're really eager to kind of engage with this with you all and other folks, but really thinking across traditionally siloed sectors of intervention and looking at how they're interdependent with one another. And like I said, solving the dam removal challenge, water quality challenges is really dependent on changing land relations, which in turn requires changing manufacturing, food and agroecological practices, as well as the nature of the built environment and our transportation systems. And ultimately, we really are seeking improved human and ecological health, which engenders new models of, say, health insurance and healthcare, which is also a key sector of transformation for how we value, different activities and how the financial system supports different human relations. On that note, I'll end it with our one of our feathered friends, who's sorry, we can skip over that one. You already saw some of our faces. The eagles are more important than us at this point anyways, but just like our forests have regenerated in a very profound way, bald eagles were locally extirpated and regionally almost extirpated through the widespread use of DDT in this region, and it was a key intervention to reduce the toxicity. We're still dealing with a lot of environmental toxicity, but a very relatively small intervention through this system has led to a profound regenerative capacity through these large, glorious birds being more present. I just saw one this morning, taking my daughter to school, just hovering above the state highway. So I take it as a positive sign that the region itself has very high vitality and is capable of regenerating, and we can work alongside it to really do glorious things. So thanks for listening to us. We know it's a lot, but we just try to do some justice to the dense network of networks of folks working on different things here.
Wow. A lot of justice done, and I'm sure so much more to do. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Z. Thank you, Roberta. Thank you, Will. Thank you, all the different nodes of the network that you all are attending. There's so much richness and capacity there, as you all mentioned. Wow. I would love to get a quick show of hands. Yeah, could you raise your hand if you're in the Northeast and somehow in some way connected to this organizing work that's going on? Okay. So essentially like half the call. Amazing. And Jessica, I see your hand and I'll get to you. Oh, maybe you're just raising your hand for that. Great. Um, Great. I'd love to open up for questions for about 15 minutes here. And I want to kick us off with my own curiosity here, which is obviously there's so much going on across a really active region, so many diverse partners. And I heard as the mission of this organizing initiative to foster collaboration and coherence. And I'd love just to hear your experiences thus far trying to do that. How do you know when you're moving closer towards collaboration and closer towards coherence, and when you're moving away from that thing? And what are the tensions coming up in this work right now? I think it'd be useful for folks in similar places with a lot of activity to feel how that process can go and some of the pitfalls in that. So curious if any of you feel like you could offer a response to that. Yeah, Roberta.
Yeah, I could talk to that just for a moment and then pass it on. But from my experience, it has moved in many ways from the digital world where there's so much good organizing and sense making going on, which is really beautiful. But then having the chance to actually travel across our beautiful bioregion to be in person in community physically with other members of the network has really enhanced this relationship building. I think we're all pretty much in agreement that the relationships come first, not just the human to human relationships, but to make sure that we're all maintaining that deep relationship that we each hold with the earth itself and with especially with our beloved bioregion. So the relationship building, I think, is tremendously important from a challenges point of view. I I think that we're all in this work 100%, which means that the other things that we do in our lives, we have to find a way to integrate this work into all of the other things that the wonderful organizations that we've described today. The work of those organizations is in alignment, but there are other responsibilities that we have that are not as related to this project. So it's really one of the challenges for me personally has been uh, finding ways to integrate across my life all that I'm doing. And I think it's beautifully happening. I'm really excited about that. But this this wonderful opportunity that's come up with regard to the BioFi round and all of this has just emerged very, very quickly, and keeping all of it, you know, in attention, and giving it all its justice, as Z put it. That's very challenging, but I'd say that it is the relationships that are holding this. And before I got on this call, I went outside and connected to the forest that we live in, and that really is where I draw a tremendous amount of strength for this work. So yeah, I would say relationships.
I would say briefly, and Ben's on the call too, and I'd invite him to share thoughts on coherence too, if he feels so moved. But really briefly, I feel like on one hand, coherence is easy when we have like a set process or shared goal in mind. And so I think we spent a lot of time thinking about, shared principles and this idea of like systemic interdependent transformation and working across those different sectors. Makes a lot of sense. And the biofinance facility process, also is fairly ordered, maybe mechanistic in a way, but I think it leads us down a pretty defined path. The content and the experience of that path aren't predetermined, but I think I find it, it's fairly easy to get to the place you want to go if you know where that is. But then coming to agreement upon what exactly that is, that's definitely an ongoing process. I think that's why I stress, the invitation to other folks who are doing this sort of work is that we can see, at a project level, it's really easy to have many diverse folks doing things. But if we're really talking about a large scale economic transformation, I think there's a much larger open discussion what that looks like. We've had a lot of regional coherence in things like shared conservation strategies. There's a regional conservation partnership group that's very active and well resourced, and they've laid out visions for protected lands across the region. And, but that's within one sector. How do you balance that against food needs? Ben's been involved in Food Solutions New England. There's a New England food vision. From a food systems perspective, there is a regional vision. But then, how does that balance against need for forests or other types of land use? How is that interdependent with trying to bring back fishways? What are the potential synergies and win-wins? So I think we're trying to do something new, in my mind, where it's really thinking deeply about connections across these types of systems, and managing that complexity is much larger than any single individual or organization can do. So, bringing that together, I think that's an ongoing challenge, but it's also kind of exciting because it feels like a real adventure, and having a cadre of people who are motivated to do hard things is always great.
Yeah, I could weigh in briefly on the question too. So when we first met at Samantha's invitation on September 20th, so it really hasn't been that long in terms of this group coming together in the context of BioFi. Um, there was this sense that we were wrestling with this question of coherence and what is it? What are different ways to think about coherence? That there was a sense that all these different groups were operating, in some sense separately and not coherently, and yet there was something that was in the field that allowed us, having come together just in that one meeting to emerge with a new financial commitment from someone in the room, plunk $25,000 right on the table. And then, since then we've met, I don't know, 2, 3 more times in person and additional meetings, and we've been feeling our way into what this, I think organization is too monodimensional word to describe it. I don't think network quite captures it either. But one of the things so anyway, I'm just going to share this little bit from something that played a central part in our first meeting, where we framed things as a game, where a group of funders was inviting us to come together and declaring that we were ready to do it, despite our not knowing it necessarily in advance. And Actually, I'll just put it in the chat. You can see there's a link to the longer letter. But we had a conversation where we pretended that we were already, you know, being gifted with the money we needed to do whatever we wanted to do, essentially, or to get started with that. And I think that assumption that says it's the relational density that already exists here, between, that really is the form of coherence we need. It's the kind of coherence that a forest has, as opposed to the kind of coherence that, an organization might have. And that exists. And that's been something that people like, those of us on this call and many others have been building for quite a long time.
Yeah, I can offer a quick reflection just to say that I feel like this bioregion has all of the ingredients that are needed to catalyze really powerful bioregional organizing and potentially a bioregional financing facility. And yeah, there are beautiful systems maps and economic transformation strategies and land projects and bioregional learning centers and deep thinking around currencies and economic change at the Schumacher Center, and lots of research with all the academic institutions there. But absolutely, the relationships are the most important and are so rich and thoughtfully tended by this group here. And it's really beautiful to see all these presentations together, and how the efforts are weaving together so intentionally, even just in a short period of time, as you mentioned, Ben.
Yeah, I second that. Thank you, Samantha. I'd be curious if there's a question that feels really alive from anyone who's tuning in for the first time. Victoria.
I was curious how you got to the idea that rivers are alive and that nature is alive with some of these more conservative, historically, organizations. Like, was that a leap, or is that not spoken about? Or because I heard that in the presentation, it kind of assumes that we are that way.
Well, I guess I would say that my dad's on the call here, and both my parents are aquatic ecologists. So I think starting from a place of the aliveness of rivers is an idea that I grew up with. Um, but I think the thing that I would like to mention here is the work of Ian McGilchrist, and these two books, The Matter with Things, which they're quite hefty here. I can share links to them, but there's I think the more important question of whether the rivers are alive or not is the question of what is the impact of believing that they're dead. So I think that we make the world in our image. If we see people as machines, if we see watersheds as machines, then they become machines. If we see them as alive and caring and animate, then that's what they become. So regardless of the reality of the situation, it is known that our mental models create the world that we live in. So if we want to have a beautiful and nourishing and meaningful relationship with the places that we live, starting with the assumption of aliveness is preconditioned.
Just want to weigh in on that real quick because it's near and dear to my heart. And thanks for that beautiful kind of response, Will. But like one thing I can thank my Polish forebears and upbringing is that, we've never let go of this notion of nature as having agency, and that, from simple things like having your dogs having personality and recognizing their personhood, to having a broader sense of that. And Will and I think are also aligned because my mom's a fish biologist. So we have and she was a veterinarian before she had to re-educate herself upon coming to the US to become a professor. But that sense that, we are in relation, it's something I struggled with studying ecology in a formal setting in the United States, where that kind of objectivism of the natural world was actually instilled in a lot of people as dogma. And, there's a debate in that discipline about it, and that debate has actually evolved in my lifetime in good ways. People who study animal and plant behavior, and these ideas are increasingly going mainstream that nature is a agentic force, and that plants and animals, and now there's new materialism. So there is an onto shift within the disciplinary world that I think mirrors a broader cultural awakening to the fact that, like Will's saying, it's not only more accurate and useful to think of nature as alive and having agency, but it's also just more satisfying as a human experience to see yourself in a living relation to other beings rather than just living in a dead mechanistic world.
And I'll just add one more thing because I'm just a huge fan of Ian McGilchrist. And just to get at what that reference is about, basically, McGilchrist's thesis is that our left hemisphere has been in dominance throughout kind of modernity. We have foregrounded the part of our brain that is an excellent tool for analyzing, for mapping, for breaking things apart down into their constituent parts so that we can understand the world. We need that, but we've given it dominance over the right hemisphere, which is really the part of our brain that is the synthesizing part of our brain that cannot tell the difference between the living and the dead. It's basically, there's so much flow in our thinking, and this is where a lot of our creativity comes from. It's where a lot of spirituality comes from, and so we have just really learned to foreground that part of our mind, and that's part of this onto shift thing that we're really trying to regain our ability for our right synthesizing hemisphere to utilize the tools that are inherent in our left hemisphere, but not to let them be in charge because they're a tool.
Thank you, Roberta. Thank you, Victoria, for that wonderful question. Okay, I'm gonna bring us to a close here. Thank you so much, Will. Thank you so much, Z. Thank you so much, Roberta, Ben, all the other folks who've been part of this amazing effort. It's been such a pleasure to watch all that's happened just in the past couple months, and just see the fluorescence of emerging activity. And we're excited to follow the journey and keep supporting. I want to make a couple announcements.
Can
If
I
you,
just say one thing for the team is that I would like to take this presentation to the key people in our bioregion here who are on the cusp of getting into bioregionalism, because I don't think they could see where this would lead. But this presentation just opens up all the possibilities of how we can achieve this. And it's already happening. It's not like maybe someday. No, it's happening. And you can talk about all these people, and they've been transformed in the process. And these are all the organizations we have here, that don't know each other. So I really appreciate whatever it took for you to put this together as a team. It flowed beautifully, and it is transformational. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. I did drop the link in the chat here, but also Tyler, maybe you can circulate it later.
You can take our.
definitely we can.
And
Victoria,
perhaps, Tyler, we could add some, if you have a follow-up email, we could add some links that would help people to connect with some of the organizations and
definitely.
projects that we've mentioned.
Definitely. So what we tend to do is we'll post a recap post in the high-low community of practice that has the YouTube link, and we can add other links there. But also when we post the YouTube link, we can include in the description any of the links you want. So just follow up with me via email to make sure we have all of those.
Can we put this also in the design school? I think it would be really, really helpful for
Yeah.
people.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We've been cross-posting things there, and I'll make sure this gets over there. Victoria, where are you based? Just so I.
Rochester in the Genesee Finger Lakes, all the watershed of watersheds that that drain into Lake Ontario on the U.S. side, but we're also working in the Great Lakes on all,
Wonderful.
on the continental side.
Okay, great. It's just good to know.
We just haven't gotten as far as a lot of people to
Yeah.
bring
No,
them.
thank you for
But we're
interrupting.
on the
It was
verge.
such a delightful connection and celebration. Okay, I need to make a couple announcements. Um, if you appreciate this work, there's an amazing opportunity right now to support it. So if you haven't heard, there's a whole Gitcoin grants round going on where 14 bioregional organizing teams from around the world are telling their story in the same way that the team here has told their story. And there's a diversity of sponsors who've raised $55,000 of matching funds to flow towards these teams doing this systems level work. And the Forests of the Northeast are one of those grantees. And so I'll put the link there, but I just wanted to offer a quick um, message I hope of hope that for us in the US right now, I think many of us are experiencing a lot of grief and just sadness and embarrassment about the fact that tomorrow's election day and our options seem so frustrating and our systems feel so broken. And that this Gitcoin grants round represents an opportunity to literally just support the building of a regenerative civics future, including the organizing work that's going on here in the Forests of the Northeast. And so I really encourage you to check it out, read the stories. And if you have family members, if you have friends who are pretty disillusioned by what's going on right now in our politics and our government, maybe offer this to them as an opportunity to find something where they can actually put their resources towards, they can actually vote for the future that they actually want. And there's 2 days left. So I'll put some links in there. Also want to plug that we're going to have another one of these field building calls on November 20th, featuring the team from ReFi Uganda, as well as a team in South Africa, Valley of Grace. And so we'll be shifting context entirely, but keeping the themes all the same. So let me just paste a couple things here. And if anyone from the Forest of the Northeast team want to check out, offer any requests, please do.
Thank you, everyone, for showing up today. It's been great to see you all.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Such inspiring presentations. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for hosting us, Samantha and Tyler. Just great. Thank you. I really appreciated being with all of you. And thank you, Victoria. It's so nice to see you both. Yeah. And hi, Ben.